Hello everyone, Mr. Happy here and welcome to another job versus video. It's been a while since I last compared the three healers, and considering we may see some changes in patch 3.2, I figure I should finish the other three videos in the series before that point. Today, I'll be comparing the three melee jobs of Final Fantasy XIV, the Monk, the Dragoon, and the Ninja. This video should not dissuade you from playing the job you love, but hopefully can help you determine which you'd like to play if you're choosing just now. First, I'll start with my main job, Ninja. This job was introduced back in patch 2.4 as a quote-unquote scouting type job, one that utilizes stealth and utility to bring usefulness to the raid group. While it kind of fails on the stealth end since stealth breaks as soon as a boss is engaged, it does bring its ninjutsu and other utilities to the raid to buff itself and debuff opponents. These spells are activated by pressing mudra buttons in succession in a variation of combos. Putting in a correct combination will turn your ninjutsu button into the desired effect, while a failed combination activates a bunny hat so everyone can make fun of your failure. To quickly get through some of the easier ones, Fuma Shuriken is single target physical damage, Raiton is single target magic damage, Katan is AoE magic damage, Hyotan binds the target in place, and Hutan increases your attack speed. Hutan's effect lasts 70 seconds, but can be extended with the use of the combo ability Armor Crush, which extends the duration by 30 seconds. Dotan places an AoE on the ground that deals damage every few seconds, while also slowing movement speed of any enemy standing inside, although it barely works on any enemies realistically. Now this is a big thing. Note, do not use Dotan on single targets. Its total potency is only 240. Its potency with Kasatsu is 360. It is not better than using Raiton. Please, so many STDs, that's single target Dotans. Oh, and finally, Suiton, which allows ninjas to access two of their stealth-only abilities without the need for stealth. To clarify as well, Kasatsu is another ability, as I mentioned earlier, that resets your ninjutsu cooldown and ensures that the next attack will be a crit. Let's segue that into talking about ninja's other utilities. This is where the job gets the majority of its value. Trick Attack is one of those two Suiton accessed abilities, and when it strikes the opponent from behind, it not only hits really hard, but increases the enemy's damage taken by 10% for a short time. Since it can be used once a minute, it's pretty nice for raid DPS. The other Suiton ability is Sneak Attack, which just does big damage if used from the front of the boss. It has its uses, but they're fairly limited. Jugulate is an off-global cooldown ability that silences, and Mug increases basic drop rates. It doesn't work on items and chests though, so just keep that in mind. Goad can give an ally several hundred TP over time, making it awesome for long fights. Smokescreen allows you to reduce the enmity of an ally in case they are a black mage who says "Woo" uses quelling strikes, and Shadewalker allows you to transfer your own enmity to the target you cast it on so you can kill said black mage and make him learn his lesson. I mean, make sure the tanks hold aggro. Yeah, that one. Ninjas also have two poisons, also known as kiss buffs. You can choose to activate one or the other to increase your damage and change one of your utilities. Kiss of the Wasp turns Jugulate's silence into a short stun, while Kiss of the Viper changes Mug's drop rate effect into stealing health. They then also have Dancing Edge to provide their slashing debuff on enemies, Shade Shift to protect them from a small amount of physical damage, and Shikuchi, which is a ground-targeted jumping ability, great for getting around a boss arena or PvP. For cross-class, Ninja draws from Pugilist and Lancer, the base classes of its two opponents in this video. From Pugilist, it gets Featherfoot, Second Wind, Haymaker, Internal Release, and Mantra. From Lancer, it gets Feint, Keen Flurry, Invigorate, and Blood for Blood. Of these abilities, it's considered mandatory to have Invigorate, Blood for Blood, and Internal Release. Most ninjas will then take Second Wind, and the last slot is optional. Keen Flurry is good on fights where there's raid-targeted physical damage, such as Turn 13 or A1 Savage. Mantra can also help with healing, but 5% isn't a whole lot. It's not bad, it's just not the greatest. So let's go into the pros of the ninja job, and its biggest pros are its immense amounts of utility. I mean, Trick Attack, Shadewalker, Smokescreen, Jugulate, which has a silence and a stun, Goad, Dancing Edge. The utility is strong with this one. Since its introduction, it has been a highly valued member of most raid groups and only got stronger with Heavensward. It also does have some solid personal DPS capabilities, though it pales in comparison to the other two. Not by a whole lot, but it is indeed less. Duality makes your next weapon skill hit twice, and Dream Within a Dream is just another off-global cooldown damage skill, which was pretty disappointing for the expansion, but it's more damaging stuff, so can't complain too much. It is also a job that has fewer positional attacks than the other jobs, so if memorizing mudra patterns for ninjutsu comes easy to you, the rest of the job will likely follow suit. Ninja's drawbacks are less about the job itself and more about the type of playstyle it requires. Since the job operates with so many utilities and off-the-global cooldown skills, especially the mudras, having a high latency can make the job a bit more difficult to enjoy. This was highly alleviated in a recent patch that made ninjutsu much easier to perform, but when your utilities are lagging and it's wasting off global cooldown time, it begins to weigh heavily on your soul. It's also important to understand how to use and time your utilities with the coordination of your group, especially for something like Trick Attack, which definitely requires more communication. That being said, I feel that these drawbacks aren't a defining aspect of the job itself, just something to think about with what kind of player you are and what kind of jobs you're interested in playing. Ultimately, while the ninja has the lowest damage potential of the three melee jobs, it brings the highest raid utility, and honestly, most raids feel pretty incomplete without them. Next up, we have the Dragoon. A staple in the Final Fantasy series, the Dragoon has become a centerpiece in the Heavensward expansion and has turned from a job that was endlessly made fun of in 2.0 to a job that is still endlessly made fun of, but is awesome. Dragoon has two key aspects. The first is its multiple jumps, something that is standard in the Final Fantasy series. Some of them deal damage, stun, do damage in an AoE, even used for retreating / cool backflips. The second major aspect is Blood of the Dragon, a buff that must be maintained with the use of a 4th tier combo system that randomly procs after using Full Thrust and Chaos Thrust. To be clear, you have two different skills that can proc after either of those combos. Which of the two that happens is random, but you will always get one as long as Blood of the Dragon is up. Keeping this buff up is only part of the challenge though, as it's also crucial to know when you can expend some of its duration in order to perform Skogul, a huge line AoE that deals high damage. If you can master these two aspects, the Dragoon is a wrecking ball of pain with some decent utility thrown in. The Dragoon offers two big utilities while also offering some minor ones alongside them. The biggest utility is Battle Litany, a large AoE buff to everyone's critical hit rate in range. As the only job to offer an AoE crit buff, it's credited for a lot when it comes to burst phases and damage over the period of an entire fight. The other ability is Disembowel, which reduces an enemy's piercing resistance by 10%. This not only applies to the Dragoon's damage, but increases any Bard or Machinist damage from the group as well, making it a huge boost to overall raid DPS. Other than these two, Dragoon has 2 stuns, an attack speed slow on Feint, which you'll probably never use, a self-parry buff in Keen Flurry, and a 100% crit plus heal on your next single target weapon skill from Life Surge. Their Blood for Blood is also significantly stronger and is much safer to use, on top of their high base HP values, definitely being the highest of the 3 melee jobs, making them pretty durable. Cross-class skills for the Dragoon are from the Pugilist and Marauder. For the Pugilist, it's common to take Internal Release and Second Wind, similar to Ninja, while from the Marauder, you usually take Bloodbath and Mercy Stroke. The 5th slot is really up to the user. Some take Mantra for that weak healing buff like the Ninja, while others take Foresight for some more tankiness. One thing I know a lot of Dragoons avoid is Fracture. Because of the tight timing of Blood of the Dragon, it can be detrimental in delaying the management of that buff. So right into the pros of the Dragoon. As you might have been able to tell, it's a pretty straightforward job to talk about. Since its utility isn't as in-depth as Ninja, and both of its major utilities are actually part of its damage rotation, it doesn't have as much raid responsibility outside of its stuns. It is incredibly easy to understand while leveling up, and only really gains difficulty when you obtain Blood of the Dragon and Skogul. When getting these skills, along with the skills that extend Blood's duration, put most of your learning efforts into that. The Piercing debuff and Battle Litany are also huge assets to assist raid groups that need to push more DPS, so pretty much, you're always useful as a Dragoon. as long as you're not dead on the floor. The cons, once again, come more into the playstyle, similar to Ninja. The job is pretty intimidating because it has a lot of buttons you need to press and manage, and latency can be a killer on Blood of the Dragon. Dragoon is also the slowest of the melee jobs, having the longest global cooldown when buffs are taken into account, though it hardly feels slow when you're playing it. One of the biggest cons is that your jumps lock you in a position for a short period of time, so if you jump at the wrong time, it can leave you helpless to avoid attacks and will easily get you killed. To be fair, Ninja also had this issue with Assassinate that I didn't bring up before, though it's used far less frequently than jumps. Finally, it's incredibly boring for the first 26 levels. Heavy thrust, impulse drive, impulse drive, impulse drive, impulse drive, heavy thrust. Bam, first 26 levels of your job. But I promise you, if you can get through that, it does pick up. Overall, Dragoon has a good balance of damage and utility amongst the 3 melee jobs. Would probably be underpowered or unbalanced if it had a wyvern pet. Finally, we look at the Monk. This is my personal favorite of the 3, even though it's not my main. The Monk combines the need to constantly move for positional attacks with lots of buff management and fast attacks to make for an adrenaline-filled job. The main mechanics of the job include its stances and greased lightning. Every time the Monk uses certain weapon skills, they switch between one of 3 stances: Oppo Oppo, Raptor, and Coeurl. While Oppo Oppo stances attacks are always available, certain attacks only become available while in Raptor and Coeurl. On top of that, they almost all get bonus effects as long as you're in the correct stance, and extra damage of standing on the correct side of the enemy. You basically rotate your abilities from Oppo Oppo to Raptor to Coeurl, back to Oppo Oppo, and maintain that pattern throughout the fights. You can use Form Shift to change forms when you aren't able to hit anything, but if you're hitting things, don't ever use it. Every time you perform an attack that benefits from Coeurl's stance, you also generate Greased Lightning, which stacks up to 3 times and increases the Monk's attack speed and damage. While these stacks can be expended to unleash Tornado Kick, an off-global cooldown ability that deals moderate damage, you only do this when you know you're going to lose the buff anyway. Your job otherwise is to keep this buff up at all times, along with your other buffs, debuffs, and dots to ensure you can output the most damage. The 2 most basic utilities to manage for Monk, and I say manage and I use that term very lightly, is Dragon Kick and Twin Snakes. Dragon Kick reduces an enemy's blunt resistance and intelligence. This not only makes it increase your damage as a Monk, but also makes them deal less magic damage, a very valuable utility. Twin Snakes simply increases your damage dealt by 10%. Other than this, manage your dots and rotate in other attacks that deal higher damage such as Boot Shine and True Strike. You pretty much want to be alternating between Dragon Kick and Boot Shine on that stance and True Strike and Twin Snakes on that stance, while doing Demolish every 3rd rotation for your Coeurl stance attacks. Monk does possess a decent amount of other utilities, though most aren't really valued by the player base very highly. Shoulder Tackle is a stun and gap closer on a pretty short cooldown, can also be used just for the damage if you want to. Steel Peak has a stun attached to it as well, so they have 2 stuns, similar to Dragoon. Monk also has Enhanced Mantra, making it a massive 25% AoE buff to healing received if you're affected by it. While this sounds great, and it is great, it's largely underutilized or undervalued in a lot of fights. Featherfoot increases evasion. Yay! Haymaker allows you to use a global cooldown to counter after evading and apply a slow, which will delay all of your other abilities. Yay! It also has a stronger internal release for a higher crit rate, a stronger second wind for more personal healing, and they also have 2 attacks. One of them is an AoE silence, one of them strips a buff off the opponent. You pretty much never use these in PvE. You can, there are a few situations, but you almost never do. More PvP kind of abilities. It also has 3 fist buffs you can choose between. Fist of Fire increases your damage dealt, so you'll use that 99% of the time. Fist of Wind lets you run faster like Sonic, which has its occasional use, and Fist of Earth reduces your damage taken, which can be useful for rough scenarios or when you're weakened after death and don't trust your healers to protect you. Mostly, you just use Fist of Fire and never turn it off. Finally, one of the Monk's expansion additions was Meditation. This is a quick ability that grants 1 stack of Meditation each time it's used. When you're at 5 stacks, you can either hit hard with Forbidden Chakra or regenerate 300 TP with Purification. This ability, like Form Shift, is meant to be used when you have nothing to hit or you're down to 0 TP and you're just sitting on waiting for TP for your GCDs anyway. So learning when you can stack this is pretty crucial in fights. Monk's cross-class skills come from Lancer and Marauder. It pretty much takes the necessities of Lancer and Marauder we mentioned with Ninja and Dragoon before, with the ability to take either Foresight or Keen Flurry as your 5th ability. Now Fracture isn't actually as bad on Monk as it is on Dragoon. There is always heavy debate on whether or not a Monk should incorporate it into its rotation. The verdict most people come to, and the verdict I support most, is that it is okay to use in very limited fashion, as it can ensure that debuffs and buffs reach their full duration before being overwritten. The problem can be that extended use of it over the course of a fight will drain your TP too fast. Now, of course, if a fight is so short that's not an issue, that's another situation where Fracture is okay. So if you do use it with caution and use it intelligently. Don't just use it for no reason. So Monk's pros are a bit limited and linear compared to other jobs. You heard me mention that Ninja had low damage and high utility, Dragoon had balanced damage and utility. Well, Monk has the highest damage and low utility. A Monk does monstrous amounts of single target and AoE damage, and just realized, never mentioned how bad Ninja's AoE damage was. It's so bad I forgot about it. Damn, that sucks. With Rockbreaker and Coral Stance, Elixir Field every 30 seconds, and Howling Fist all dealing AoE damage, it can pretty much wreck large groups of enemies or adds as long as it has the TP to sustain it. It also has good TP sustain, with the extra TP from Purification there if you ever need it over the Forbidden Chakra. Dragon Kick is very valuable if you lack a Dark Knight or need the Intelligence debuff on more than one target. A1 Savage comes to mind. Mantra is also great in healing intensive phases, regardless of how people undervalue it. It's just there for that boost. And finally, the job just has the fewest buttons to press. It's more about the movement than pressing a lot of buttons like the other two jobs are. Now the cons with Monk may seem worse than other jobs at first, but in my opinion, they're only fitting considering how much damage Monk brings to the table. While I mentioned Dragon Kick and Mantra are nice, you also heard me mention that they're not really valued very highly. Instead, most people value the other two melee DPS's raid utilities and DPS balances. This makes Monk's biggest offering its DPS, which is usually made up for by bringing a Dark Knight to the raid group over a Paladin to not only ensure that the int debuff is still there, but that you can make up some of that damage difference strictly through tank DPS. Playstyle wise, it does demand a lot of movement in exchange for those fewer button presses, so mastering fights and knowing how to hit all your positionals is incredibly important. This can cause tunnel vision and difficulty at performing mechanics, or it can make you not give a crap and get hit by attacks just to ensure you get the positional. That's my favorite one to do. And that about wraps up my overview on these three jobs. So as per usual, people always say, which one is best? Which one of these do I rate the highest? Well, to be honest, I rate them all equally. While I find that Monk is the most fun to play and that Ninja is my main, I like the power struggle that the three melee jobs have. One is low DPS high utility, one is high DPS low utility, and another is smack dab in the middle. It feels pretty good to have that means of distinguishing the jobs. I do think Monk may need a bit of love just because its higher DPS rarely outweighs the utilities the other jobs bring, but a Monk can beat content as well as the other two jobs, so don't let that stop you from playing it. A lot of people like to reference A3 Savage as an example. Oh, there wasn't a Monk in most of the groups, but there was a Monk in one of the 6 groups that beat it on the second week. So, I mean, that's gotta matter for something, I imagine. Well, maybe they'll change some fights around, maybe something will happen to the Monk job, and everyone will love it like they did in 2.4, when everyone was like, this is the best job ever made. Anyway, thank you for watching. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and check out the other videos that are on my channel. Also, stay tuned for more Final Fantasy XIV content as we get ready for patch 3.2 coming next month. Also, be sure to vote on which video you want to see next. Do you want to see Black Mage vs Summoner, or do you want to see Bard vs Machinist? There will be a straw poll in the description of the video, so be sure to check that out as well. Anyway, that's going to be the end of this video. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care.